What would you do if the quiet woman sitting at the last table in the restaurant was actually the one who founded it? No one recognized her. No one bothered to ask her name. The server walked past. The manager barely looked at her, and the menu wasn't made for someone like her. No shouting, no confrontation. Just the gaze of a woman who had once given her whole life, now treated like a stranger. But 12 hours later, an emergency meeting was called at headquarters. 3 days later, a table was removed from the Westwood restaurant. And 7 weeks later, the entire premium service model was rewritten. All because of one woman in white they refused to listen to. This isn't a story about bad service. It's a story about systemic forgetting and how one empty chair forced an entire industry to face itself. Charleston, South Carolina. On a Saturday evening at the end of June, the sky was draped in a soft lavender hue like hand-dyed silk. The golden light from antique storefronts reflected off the cobblestone pavement, creating a feeling that was both warm and solemn. On bustling Broad Street, the restaurant Willow and Ash stood like a finely polished gem. Large glass windows, a delicately curved bronze-lit sign, and staff in black suits stepping out to greet guests with poised expressions. This was the soft opening night of the 18th branch in the Harper and Hearth chain, one of the dominant culinary brands in the American South. Inside, the open space exuded Southern luxury fusion. Heavy walnut tables with a vintage patina, bohemian crystal glasses shimmering under French pendant lights, and soft jazz playing like liquid gold from speakers hidden in the exposed brick walls. Everything was designed to impress and to subtly make those not of the right class feel like outsiders. And then she walked in, a black woman in her early 40s with an upright, composed gait. She wore a high-collared white button-up shirt, neatly tailored black slacks, no designer labels, no flashy accessories. Her hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her face free of elaborate makeup. She came alone. No introduction, no words. She looked like someone who had just stepped out of a tense meeting and wanted to treat herself to a quiet dinner. But if one looked closely, they would notice that her steps weren't hesitant. They were calmly confident, as if she knew this place better than anyone present. Because in truth, she did. Her name was Janelle Harper, the founder of Harper and Hearth. She had started her career in a small kitchen in Savannah, rising through layers of discrimination, of race, gender, background, to build a billion-dollar empire that now spanned 11 states. But tonight, she wasn't here as a CEO. She came alone, unannounced, with no assistant, no visible authority. She wanted to enter the space she had created as a regular customer, to see how her staff would treat someone who didn't look like someone who deserved respect. She walked directly to the host stand. The hostess, Kristen, blonde curls lightly styled, Bluetooth earpiece on, was fixated on the iPad reservation screen. Without looking up, she spoke by reflex. "Welcome to Willow and Ash. Do you have a reservation?" Janelle replied briefly, "Yes." Harper, one guest. VIP section. Kristen looked up, her eyes pausing for a beat when she saw that the guest was a modestly dressed black woman. The glance was fleeting, but enough for Janelle to register judgment. Kristen furrowed her brow, glanced back down. "You're alone?" "Yes." "All right, let me double check." Just then, from the main bar area, a middle-aged man in a black suit walked over. He wore a silver watch, his hair slicked back, his smile polite but his eyes clouded with an undertone of bias. His name was Bradley Knox, manager of the Charleston location. He glanced briefly at Janelle, then asked Kristen, "Is there an issue?" Kristen replied quietly, "This lady says she reserved a VIP table, but she's alone." Bradley nodded and stepped closer. "Good evening. I'm the manager on duty. You're requesting a VIP table? For one? Under what name?" "Harper," Janelle said. "Are you aware that tonight is a soft opening?" "I am. We typically prioritize loyal guests, parties of 2 or more, and usually VIPs don't." He glanced at her outfit, then added, half joking, half condescending, "Dressed like accountants." A few quiet chuckles echoed from the bar. Janelle didn't react. She looked him straight in the eye and spoke evenly. "I believe dress code doesn't determine one's right to be served." Of course," Bradley raised a hand. But I'm sure you understand. We're trying to maintain a consistent image tonight. Unfortunately, the VIP table you reserved has already been reassigned. I received a confirmation email earlier today. Table 3, 7 p.m., under Harper. Yes, perhaps a glitch in the system, but now I suggest you sit in the lounge outside. I'll have someone bring you a more appropriate menu. At that moment, a young waiter approached, Connor, holding a small black and white printed menu on recycled paper. He set it on the counter and said, "This is the limited menu for solo guests. Simpler dishes, faster service. Prices are easier on the wallet too." He smirked, not even trying to hide his tone. Janelle didn't respond. She glanced at the menu. 3 items, no images, nothing resembling fine dining standards. This was a guest classification menu, and she understood she had just been placed in the not worth full service category. People nearby began to notice. At a table close by, a young Asian woman with a black bob and a white blazer turned to observe. Her name was Leah Tran, a food vlogger popular on Reddit and Instagram. Sitting beside her was her boyfriend, Chase Miller. Leah nudged him, pulled out her phone and whispered, "Record this. It's content." Chase hesitated. "You sure? The way they're discriminating is plain as day. I'm not letting it slide." Janelle remained still. She didn't say who she was. She simply pulled out her phone, opened the internal operations app, and pressed the button. Activate Branch 18 surveillance. From that moment on, all audio, actions, and employee interactions in the system would be logged to the central server. No one knew what she had just done. No one imagined that the woman in the simple white shirt was the very soul behind the empire they worked for. She didn't need to get angry. She didn't need to raise her voice. She just needed to stand there. Because people around her were starting to watch, and because the real story was only just beginning. The menu placed in front of her was like an unspoken reminder. You don't belong here. It wasn't a sleek, leather-bound menu like the ones neatly resting on the VIP tables across the room. There were no embossed dish names, no elegant descriptions, no welcoming words from the chef. Just a flimsy black and white sheet listing 3 simple dishes with the prices printed large, almost as if the only thing they expected her to care about was the number. Each item was under $25, and not a single one appeared on the official menu she herself had once approved for the Willow and Ash system. Janelle picked up the sheet between 2 fingers, as if holding an object entirely unrelated to the world she had built. This was the menu for someone like her, not based on taste, but based on the assumption that she wasn't worth serving anything better. Bradley stepped back behind the front desk, arms crossed like someone who had just finished restoring order. His eyes flicking over to Kristen in a silent cue that the rest was now up to her. Kristen, still holding the iPad, glanced at Janelle and then quickly looked down, as if afraid to meet her eyes again. Janelle said nothing. She didn't leave. She simply placed the menu back on the counter, exactly where Connor had left it, not even a corner out of place. The atmosphere inside the restaurant hadn't gone completely silent, but something had shifted. A few guests had started turning toward the front desk, the same area that, just minutes ago, had been invisible to everyone. Leah Tran was still holding her phone, but now she had risen fully from her chair. She stepped 2 paces forward, holding the phone at chest level, not trying to hide it, but not flaunting it either. Chase remained seated, eyes scanning the room to see if anyone else was watching. They were. A group of black guests at the corner table, 2 women and a man in their 40s, dressed elegantly but unpretentiously, had also turned their attention toward the scene. The man, a businessman from Atlanta named Marcus Langston, had just set his wine glass down, his gaze shifting from curiosity to understanding. He had seen this before, in luxury hotels and executive meetings, and more than once, in the very high-end restaurants he had once invested in. Eyes like Bradley's, words like Connor's, menus like that printed sheet. They were all the visible edges of a deeply rooted system that ran on the assumption that black guests were not to be fully respected, unless they proved otherwise. Connor was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching Janelle as if expecting a reaction. Maybe he thought she'd get angry, or embarrassed and walk away, or quietly apologize for causing a scene. But Janelle did none of that. She simply looked at him, calm, unwavering, not hostile, but not avoiding. In that moment, it was her stillness that made the air heavier than any shouting match. Connor cleared his throat and walked away, leaving the menu in a strange emptiness between her and the host stand. Kristen, now visibly unsettled, turned to Bradley and whispered, "I think she might actually be a VIP guest." Bradley scoffed, "If she's a VIP, then I'm the mayor of Charleston. Go tend to the other tables." He turned and walked off, as if the matter were settled. But over at table 5, Leah had just uploaded the first clip to Reddit. Her caption was simple: Willow and Ash soft opening, guest being profiled at check-in. Watch this. The video was 36 seconds long. No edits, no voiceover. It didn't need one. Chase immediately shared it on Facebook with the comment, "Brand new restaurant from the Harper and Hearth chain. And this is how they treat black guests? Unacceptable." Within 4 minutes, the Reddit post had over 300 upvotes. Among them was an account named Truth in the South, known for tracking and exposing discriminatory incidents in the service industry. They quoted the video with the comment, "Again? How many more times do we need to see this before someone loses their job?" Janelle wasn't yet aware of the posts, but she could feel the shift in the room. No one was pretending not to see anymore. No one was acting like they didn't hear. The air was turning, and she knew that once silence is broken, it never returns the same. She turned back to Kristen. "I'd like to reconfirm, the VIP table I reserved, what's its current status?" Kristen hesitated. The system still shows it as reserved, but the manager has reassigned it to someone else." "Based on what criteria?" "I don't know, I really don't. But if you'd like, I can check for seating on the patio." "I didn't request patio seating. I reserved table 3, VIP section, and I'm here on time." Kristen swallowed, gripping the iPad like it was her last line of defense. She was starting to feel nervous, not necessarily because of Janelle, but because she no longer knew who she was standing in front of. That voice didn't sound like someone pleading. It sounded like someone who had been underestimated too many times and had run out of patience for it. At that moment, Bradley returned. It seemed he had overheard the last exchange. He stepped forward and interjected, "You're making a scene. It's just a table. If you want to sit somewhere else, I'll have someone rearrange things. No need to stand here in the lobby like this. I'm simply asking for what I reserved and confirmed. And I told you I reassigned it. You can go eat somewhere else if you're unhappy." "I'm not leaving a place I built," Janelle said, for the first time letting slip a sliver of truth. Not by title, but in words strong enough to make Kristen turn her head, strong enough to make Marcus Langston raise an eyebrow, strong enough to make Leah whisper to herself, "Wait, is it her?" But Janelle said no more. She remained exactly where she stood. She didn't need to raise her voice, because the way they were treating her was speaking louder than anything she could say. And with every word they uttered, they pushed themselves closer to the edge of a public relations crisis. At table 7, a white woman in her 40s dining with her husband leaned over and said quietly, "Did you see that? They really refused to seat her just because I saw. And if that's what's happening, I don't want to pay for this meal." They weren't activists. They weren't loud voices. But in that moment, something inside them cracked. And that, Janelle knew better than anyone, brands don't collapse from big scandals. They crumble under thousands of tiny fractures no one bothers to fix. And tonight, she didn't need to hide anymore, because they were bringing the story into the light all by themselves. The table they brought Janelle to was near the end of a hallway, right next to the double swing door that led into the kitchen. It was the kind of spot no one ever chose, and one that was never meant for guests on opening day. No flowers, no candles. The chair didn't match the rest of the decor, and water stains from the previous guest were still on the tabletop, untouched. The smell of frying oil, the clatter of metal, and the yelling from the kitchen spilled out each time the door swung open, making the space feel makeshift, as if it were meant for rushed staff lunches, not paying customers. But they pointed her here as the best available option, and no one seemed to think that was wrong. Connor stood next to the table, hands on hips, smirking. "You can sit here for now. It's not VIP like you wanted, but it's clean and functional. We'll provide full service." Without waiting for Janelle's response, he pulled out the chair and gestured with exaggerated politeness, like a performer in a cheap comedy routine. Janelle didn't smile, but she didn't refuse either. She stepped forward, calmly sat down, and placed her handbag beside her. There was nothing submissive about her posture. It was the patience of someone allowing others to keep making mistakes. Kristen hadn't returned, and the new server was a young man, early 20s, name tag reading Ricky. He placed a glass of cold water on the table, without the silk napkin that was standard. Instead, he dropped a stack of cheap paper napkins, the kind usually kept in the employee break room. Ricky glanced at Janelle for a second, then smiled slightly and said, "Our menu's a bit different from the VIP one, but I'm sure you'll find something in your price range." The words came quickly, like he'd said them before to people who didn't look rich. Janelle didn't react. She simply opened her bag, pulled out a slim iPad, woke the screen, and began entering her passcode. Over at table 5, Leah and Chase were still watching. Leah had just received a Reddit notification. Her first video had passed 2,000 views in just 20 minutes. An account named at Food Justice Now had re-uploaded the video to TikTok with the caption, "Black plus female equals not good enough to eat here." Chase was scrolling through Twitter, where the hashtag Willow and Ash had started appearing sporadically. What was happening was no longer a private incident. It was becoming a story people wanted to tell. Janelle wasn't aware of all that, but she knew that with just a few more steps, the truth would be impossible to stop. She quietly opened an app on her tablet called ECHO, a monitoring system she herself had approved for Willow and Ash 3 months before launch. Every restaurant in the chain was equipped with sensors to evaluate service quality, response times, types of utensils provided, frequency of support requests. The app wasn't built to spy on staff. It was designed to protect the customer experience, especially for those most likely to be overlooked. She tapped the floor plan that appeared on screen, with green dots representing employees. Connor was now listed at the front desk. Ricky had just returned to the kitchen. Kristen was still inside the back office, unmoving. Connor returned, this time with 2 plain white plates and 3 small salt packets. "Food's being prepped, but just so you know, the kitchen's running slow because of the opening. Hope you understand. Oh, and if you want bread, you can grab some from the back. This section doesn't get full service." His tone was unmistakable. It meant, "for someone like you." Janelle looked up and asked slowly, "Do you say that to the guests sitting at VIP tables?" Connor paused, then burst into laughter. "I guess they don't need reminding. They know how to order. They know their place." For the first time, Janelle tilted her head slightly, her gaze no longer neutral. "And you think my place is next to the kitchen?" Connor shrugged. "I don't think anything. I just go by instinct. You're not the first I've had to reassign." An accidental confession, a self-portrait, and he didn't even know it. Leah began filming a second video. She zoomed in on Janelle's table, then panned the camera toward the kitchen door, showing the physical distance between this guest and the rest of the restaurant. Chase nodded. "This one's the real evidence. No one needs to yell. Just watch, and it says everything." At another table near the window, an elderly white woman leaned toward her granddaughter and whispered, "Why would they seat her there? She's not dressed poorly." The little girl answered almost reflexively, "Maybe because she's black." Ricky returned, placing a plate of fried chicken and potatoes on the table, but no utensils. When Janelle asked, he smiled. "I thought you brought your own." Connor was nearby and heard it, but said nothing. Instead, he pulled out his phone and texted someone. "This lady's acting like she's in a play, but I'm telling you, she's nobody important." The message sent, unaware that the ECHO system was recording everything. Every action, every response time, even the tone of service was being logged. And it was Janelle herself reading it all. She opened a report tag, marked it Anomaly Flag, VIP Downgrade, then added notes. Connor, deliberate reassignment, tone demeaning, Ricky, inappropriate comment. Every line she typed was a quiet verdict. No harsh strokes, no rage. When truth is documented properly, it speaks for itself. Outside, Marcus Langston was checking his phone. A friend had just sent him a Reddit link with the caption, Is this Willow and Ash Charleston? Looks like the place you invested in. Marcus watched the clip and recognized Janelle, not because they had met, but because he had seen her photo in the investor report last year. He stood up at once, walked toward the front desk, and without saying a word stared directly at Connor for several seconds. Connor, not recognizing him at all, forced a nervous smile. "Sorry, can I help you with something?" Marcus simply asked, "Do you know who you're serving?" Hook ending. Janelle didn't answer, but on her iPad screen a line appeared. Executive mode unlocked, central access verified. Inside the restaurant, the air still carried its polished charm, but something had begun to fall out of rhythm. Like a song where the listener doesn't notice the wrong note, but their instinct tells them the melody isn't quite the same. Janelle sat quietly at the table near the kitchen door, but the echo system in her hands kept scanning and updating data. Red indicators began flashing. Degrading service quality, delayed table response, unregistered disparity tag. Each alert was tied to the names Connor and Ricky, recorded in metrics that no ordinary manager could erase. This system, designed by Janelle herself, wasn't built to punish. It was built to prove. To prove that prejudice didn't just show up in people's expressions, but in the workflow, in service pacing, in how decisions were made about who deserved standards and who did not. At table 5, Leah had just posted the second clip. In it, she zoomed in on a black woman sitting near the kitchen, using paper napkins instead of silk, receiving delayed service and visibly inferior food. The caption read, "Willow and Ash grand opening, but not for everyone." Within 8 minutes, the clip had reached 12,000 views and was being shared by accounts with profile pictures of chefs, food journalists, and bloggers focused on injustice in the service industry. Leah didn't shout. She didn't add angry hashtags. She simply wrote, "I don't know who she is, but the way they're treating her, it's not okay." Meanwhile, Marcus Langston was still at the front desk, looking directly at Connor. Connor seemed confused by the attention but maintained polite composure. "Can I help you with something, sir?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. He turned to look at Janelle's table, nodded slightly as if confirming something in his mind. He was a secondary investor in the Willow and Ash project, but had never met Janelle in person. However, he had attended a private Zoom session a few months back, where she presented the dignity-driven design philosophy, in which she emphasized, "We don't just build restaurants to serve food, we build them to serve the way people want to be seen." He remembered that look, that voice, and now he realized the woman being dismissed tonight was the very CEO none of them had ever met outside of a thumbnail photo. Marcus turned back to Connor, this time his voice sharper. "Are you sure you know who she is?" Connor shook his head, annoyed. "I don't care who she is. This is the general guest area. Everyone's treated the same." As the words left his mouth, Ricky happened to walk by, carrying a VIP food tray, complete with silverware, silk napkins, and a fresh flower garnish. As he passed Janelle's table, he smirked, the kind of smile used by people who think they're making harmless jokes. Janelle didn't respond. She simply tapped her screen. Echo activated internal operations mode. A dashboard appeared, displaying each employee's status, each table's condition, and a command was issued. "Flag for review, managerial misconduct." At that moment, Kristen emerged from the back office, her face tense. She had just received an alert from headquarters. Table 26 has enabled executive oversight mode. She headed straight for the front, glanced toward the table, then turned to Connor. "Who's sitting over there?" Connor shrugged. "Just some random guest. Dressed plain. No reservation. Annoying, but nothing serious." Kristen felt a chill. She wasn't sure if her suspicion could be true, but a vague anxiety was growing fast. She hurried toward the table. Janelle was still seated, hand on her iPad, eyes fixed on the screen. As Kristen approached, she stopped one step away and asked softly, "Excuse me, may I ask your name?" Janelle looked up. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she laid the iPad flat on the table, tilted toward Kristen, and tapped the words, "Echo, executive access enabled." Kristen read it. Her eyes widened. She stepped back slightly. She tried to place the woman's face but couldn't. She had never attended a high-level meeting important enough to meet real executive leadership. Meanwhile, Leah was recording her third video. In the clip, Kristen steps closer to Janelle's table, says something, then her expression changes. There's no sound, no explanation. But the look on her face was all social media needed to know something big had just happened. Behind Leah, another diner whispered to a friend, "They just realized something. I don't think she's just a regular customer." Chase, still glued to his phone, received a notification. A blog post from the account Kitchen Equity had just gone live, reposting the videos under the title, "When a Restaurant Doesn't Recognize the One Watching Them." On Twitter, the hashtag #Echo Dining had begun to appear. Some speculated it was a covert campaign by a social justice group. Others guessed, looks like the restaurant owner just got humiliated by her own staff, and they don't know it yet. One tweet read, "I don't know who Janelle is, but I want to work for her." The first video had now surpassed 70,000 views. Kristen returned to the front desk and whispered to Connor. At first, he scoffed, but when Kristen said, "She has executive-level access," his face went pale. "No way. Who is she?" Kristen didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out her phone and called headquarters. "I need urgent confirmation. Is the CEO currently at the Charleston branch, table 26? A second later, a voice replied on the line. "Yes, and the entire system is recording real-time data from cameras and echo. Do not interfere further." Kristen collapsed onto a nearby stool, face white. Janelle hadn't moved. She didn't need to stand. She didn't need to raise her voice. But from that moment on, everything inside the restaurant changed. Staff grew anxious. Guests began glancing toward her with a different look. Not because they knew who she was, but because the silence surrounding her had become too loud to ignore. A kind of silence that made people stop pretending. Marcus still stood at the desk, quietly observing. He pulled out his phone and typed one line into the investor group chat. "She's here." And she saw everything. It started with glances. Then came the subtle leans. And then a meaningful silence spread across the restaurant. Guests who had been busy taking photos of their meals now began sneaking looks toward table 26. It was as if they sensed something was shifting, though no one dared to say it aloud. In high-end spaces, people rarely shout, but a major shift always begins with stillness. Online, Leah's video had passed 300,000 views in just over an hour. Local news outlets had begun raising questions. Is the woman dismissed at Willow and Ash actually the CEO? Culinary industry professionals on Twitter began to weigh in, not just on the food, but on how a restaurant treats its customers. Comments spread rapidly. "She seems more like someone observing than someone just dining." "I've seen a CEO use that kind of tablet. That's not a regular iPad." One account specializing in F&B investments posted, "If she's really leadership, this entire branch could see a staffing overhaul in the next 24 hours. Those words appeared in bold letters on the screens of dozens of phones inside the very restaurant, as guests opened their apps and watched the clips at their tables. A group of 6 seated in the center, visitors from Atlanta celebrating a birthday, had started off cheerful. But after watching the video, the middle-aged man in the group set down his knife and whispered to his wife, "We should leave. I don't like the feeling here." She nodded and they stood up quietly. No shouting, no calling the manager. They simply left the check behind with a handwritten note. Relearn how to treat people. That silent exit spread faster than any public condemnation. In the next 15 minutes, 5 other tables called servers to cancel dessert and cut their meals short. One young guest stood up, holding a phone high while live streaming. "I'm at Willow and Ash, where a woman's being treated like she's invisible, and turns out she might actually be the one behind everything here." Inside the kitchen, Ricky began to panic. He realized he had gone too far with his joke about Janelle's meal. He still didn't know who she was, but now it felt like the whole system was watching his every move. A screen in the kitchen lit up with warnings from the ecosystem. Red text appeared. "Customer flagged for critical oversight. Investigative protocol in progress." Connor was still trying to appear calm, even though Kristen had stopped reacting. She sat silently at the host stand, phone in hand but not making any calls. She was reviewing internal surveillance footage, scrubbing through the moments from when Janelle first walked in. In every angle, she had never raised her voice, never complained, never demanded any special privilege. And that was exactly what made people shudder, because the greatest power always shows up quietly. Leah left her table and walked directly toward Janelle. She wasn't filming anymore. She simply stopped one step away and said softly, "I don't know who you are, but I stand with you. They shouldn't treat anyone that way." Janelle looked up, smiled gently, nodded, and replied with a simple sentence. "They won't anymore." It was the first thing she had said aloud in 2 hours. Leah returned to her seat and began writing a new caption. And then she said, "They won't anymore." The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't bitter. It was the kind of voice that tells you something is about to change. At the bar, a group of guests ordered a final round of wine, then asked Connor, "We heard someone important is here tonight?" Connor stammered, "No, it's just a misunderstanding. Some guests are being overly sensitive." But before he could finish, one of them held up their phone, showing a clip of Janelle looking into the echo camera. They exchanged glances, set their glasses down, and said, "Thanks, but I think we've had enough." Then they left. No one shouted. No one slammed a table. But the restaurant began to empty in a quiet retreat unlike anything Connor had ever seen. On the company's internal network, an emergency report from the ecosystem was auto-sent to headquarters. Anomaly triggered, discrepancy between executive-level protocol and on-site treatment. At the same time, Janelle submitted a short memo. "Do not intervene yet. I'm documenting." Within the system, all service interactions from the past 48 hours were flagged for retrieval. That entire dinner had become a living hearing. No testimony, no lawyers, just data. At a local news studio, a reporter was going live on the evening broadcast. Willow and Ash, a brand new restaurant opened this week, is now facing allegations of discrimination after a video showing a female guest receiving disrespectful service has gone viral. Multiple sources say the woman may be a senior executive of the company. The anchor switched to a map and pointed, "Location of incident, Charleston, South Carolina, branch number 3 of the chain." Back at the restaurant, Janelle stood up for the first time. She didn't walk to the host stand. She didn't call for a manager. She walked calmly toward the kitchen. Ricky saw her from a distance, froze, and stepped back. But Janelle didn't scold him. She simply looked up at the security camera near the kitchen door and raised her hand in a subtle wave. A small gesture, but enough for the internal system to log it as a timestamp. Kristen understood what it meant. Everything after that wave would be analyzed in detail. Who did what, said what, where, and when. Janelle walked to the main entrance. No one stopped her. A few remaining guests stood up, watching as if they had just witnessed something far beyond a service mistake. An older woman whispered, "That young woman, she's not just a guest." A man by the door said aloud, "She's the reason I'd come back here, if this place even survives." And as the door closed behind her, a soft breeze passed through the row of tables, now more than half empty. Connor slumped into a chair, cold sweat forming. Kristen said nothing, but in her heart, she knew. This wasn't the end. This was only the first tremor. When the restaurant door closed behind Janelle, it was as if all sound had been drained from the space. Connor sat motionless at the host station, his eyes glazed but his hands still gripping the tablet that no longer showed anything worth looking at. Kristen stood near the drink station, her gaze fixed on the floor, her back slightly hunched as if bracing against something unnamed. Ricky held a glass he'd already polished clean, but kept wiping it anyway. No one dared speak. No one even dared to breathe too loudly. Only the clatter of the kitchen filled the void, the soft taps of knives on chopping boards, the sound of running water, the hum of the ventilation system, all of it seeming to conspire to amplify the weight of the silence. Leah stood by the edge of the bar, still holding the glass of orange juice she had been about to take to table 26, the table where the woman in the white shirt had been sitting. Part of her wanted to set it down and go back to work as if nothing had happened. But another part couldn't move. Not because she knew who the woman was, but because she had seen her eyes. They weren't the eyes of someone humiliated. There was no rage, no hatred, just a gaze that passed over people as if it had seen this too many times before. As if it wasn't the act itself that wore her down, but the silence that always followed it. And Leah couldn't bear that silence anymore. She placed the glass of juice down, stepped forward, then again. When she reached the center aisle of the restaurant, she turned to face everyone, her voice not loud but clear enough to be heard by each person. I'm sorry for what happened to that woman. She didn't deserve to be treated that way. Whoever she is, we were wrong. That sentence, in a space designed for plating dishes and collecting tips, dropped like shattered glass. Connor looked up. Kristen froze. Ricky stood motionless. Marcus, the one still in the kitchen, set down his knife. No one had expected Leah to be the first to speak. She held no title. She had no authority. She was just a waitress who'd been working here for less than a year. And for that very reason, her words carried a weight no one could refute. Kristen walked over quickly, her voice trying to maintain calm. Leah, you don't have all the information. That guest didn't have a confirmed reservation. Seating decisions are made by management, not by staff. Leah looked her straight in the eyes. So was it also a management decision to let her wipe down her own table, sit for over 30 minutes without a single check-in, and serve her food without utensils? The air thickened. Connor jumped in. All right, let's not turn this into a trial. Everyone back to your stations. I'll deal with this later. But Leah didn't back down. If I don't speak today, who will tomorrow? She's not the first person to walk in here with that look in her eyes. I just don't want the next time to come and all of us pretend to be too busy again. Her voice wasn't angry, it wasn't loud, but each word sliced through the team's practiced indifference like a knife. Kristen looked around. The eyes of the staff seemed to be slowly shifting direction. Marcus stepped out from the kitchen, removed his gloves, wiped his hands on his apron, and spoke calmly. I saw everything. I also heard what Kristen said on the headset. Skip that table. Not worth it. Because she didn't look VIP. Right? Kristen went silent. Ricky started to say something, but Marcus raised a hand. Don't. You heard it. But you didn't do anything wrong. The fault is this system that made us believe staying silent was the safest choice. Another staff member, Nina, a second-week intern, spoke softly. When she stood up to get a napkin, I thought she was housekeeping. Everyone turned to look at Nina. She bowed her head. I'm sorry. I know it was wrong, but no one did anything. I thought maybe I should stay quiet like everyone else. Leah turned to her without scolding. She simply stepped forward, took Nina's hand and said, You're the second person to speak. That matters. At the main office in Austin, Texas, a system alert had just reached executive channels. Site number 3, multiple staff deviations from management protocol, potential internal dissent. Janelle read the notification on her phone while sitting at a cafe just 2 blocks from the restaurant. She didn't smile. She just exhaled quietly. She hadn't expected the spark to come from Leah, a name that hadn't even been highlighted in the HR dashboard. And yet, perhaps it was because she wasn't highlighted that her voice carried the most truth. It didn't come from status. It didn't come from calculation. It came from character. Janelle typed a few lines into a personal note file. Change always starts from the person with least to lose and the most to say. Meanwhile, inside the restaurant, Connor began to lose his composure. He tried to regain control. I need everyone back at their stations. This is an opening shift. We don't have time for internal politics. But Marcus replied, It's not politics, it's principle. Kristen snapped, So you're all just going to tear down the culture we've spent years building? Leah answered, If that culture is built on ignoring people, then it shouldn't last another day. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Ricky put down his bar towel and stepped out from behind the drink station. I'm sorry, Leah. I saw it all. I heard the headset. I could have done something differently, but I chose safety, and now I feel cowardly. Leah didn't look at Ricky like someone guilty. She simply nodded, saying that took more courage than most ever show. At that moment, a nearby group of guests, who had been watching everything, stood up. A middle-aged man in a leather jacket said aloud, I'll keep coming back here if you keep people like her around. An elderly woman beside him added, That girl, Leah, she reminds me of my granddaughter. She was once told to stay quiet at a big corporation, but she didn't, and they promoted her, not because she was brilliant, but because they needed someone brave enough to speak. Light applause broke out near the bar. Kristen stood like someone caught in a sudden wind. She tried to call headquarters, but the system had already been locked down from a higher level. A message popped up. Your line has been redirected. Connor checked his tablet and saw red text. Escalation under executive review. He turned to Kristen, speechless. Leah walked toward the employee bulletin board near the entrance. On it was a photo of Ricky, labeled Employee of the Month. She quietly took it down, replaced it with a blank sheet of paper, and wrote by hand. Never underestimate the voice of someone who dares to stand in a crowd and say, "This is wrong." Marcus stood beside her. Nina raised her phone to take a photo. No one told her to. No one ordered it. But no one stopped her. That night, a short clip of Leah's words spread across Willow and Ash's internal network. The hashtag number sign "the girl who spoke up" appeared for the first time. 1 week later, Janelle wouldn't need to say anything. She would only need to show up, because real change hadn't started in the boardroom, but on the floor, among those with the least power and the greatest kindness. Kristen rushed into the back storage room of the restaurant, slamming the door so hard that papers on top of the filing cabinets trembled. Connor followed close behind, sweat beading on his forehead. "You know this is spreading outside already, right?" Kristen snapped. Connor nodded but didn't dare look her in the eye. He was rifling through folders, hoping to find anything, any piece of background info on the woman in the white shirt, some detail that might help them salvage the situation. She didn't book through the system, there's no loyalty record, no membership ID, didn't leave a phone number. It's like, Connor exhaled, like she didn't need any of it. Kristen frowned. No one walks into a flagship restaurant and carries themselves like they own the place without a reason. Outside, the restaurant had yet to reopen. Marcus had requested a short internal meeting, something unheard of on an opening night. Leah stood beside the staff bulletin board, where she'd pinned up the handwritten sheet. Ricky, Nina, and 2 other employees gathered around her, not to take orders, but to hear something they felt was right. "I don't know who she is," Leah said, "but I know this. We missed the chance to understand a person just because of how she was dressed." Ricky added, "Maybe she's not anyone important, but I've never seen someone sit quietly for nearly an hour without complaining, without walking out, just waiting. That kind of patience, that belongs to someone who's seen more than we think." Marcus looked around. "Has anyone ever seen her before?" Everyone shook their heads, but then Nina, the intern, spoke up. "Wait, I think I saw her photo somewhere." Kristen and Connor heard it too. They rushed out of the room and quickly approached Nina. "Where?" Kristen asked sharply. Nina stepped back, a little startled. I'm not sure. Maybe during onboarding, when I started my internship." Connor darted back into storage, flipping through drawers. He pulled out an old binder labeled W&A Leadership Archives, Legacy Sites. Kristen snatched it from his hands and flipped through page after page. And then they saw a black and white photo, a black woman standing in a bare-bones kitchen. No lights, no marble, just a gas stove, cast iron pans, and a confident smile. Below the photo it read, "Janelle Rose Baines, co-founder, Site Number 1, Original Test Kitchen, 1999. Both of them froze. Leah stepped forward, looked at the photo, then looked back at them. "I'm guessing you didn't know her name until right now." Kristen swallowed hard. Connor dropped into a chair. "It can't be. She's not listed as a founder in any of the admin files." Leah took the sheet with Janelle's photo. "Maybe someone thought erasing her name from the records would make her disappear." Marcus looked at Kristen, and for the first time the respect was gone from his eyes. "You know, when I first started here, an old employee mentioned someone named Janelle, but when I asked HR, they said there was no record of her. And I believed them. Why? Because they wore suits and I wore an apron." Kristen stammered, "That's not possible. The system should have her info, if she was truly a founder." Connor's voice hardened for the first time that day. "Then who cleared it all out? Who allowed a founder to wipe down her own table at the flagship she helped create?" Ricky looked at both of them. "Let me be real. If she walked in today not as a known figure, but just an older black woman in a white shirt, and no one knew her name, then the fault isn't hers. It's in how this place was trained to define a person's worth. While the conversation continued inside, Leah stepped out of the restaurant holding the photo. She stood in front of the doors and snapped a picture of Janelle's image and the caption underneath. Then she uploaded it to the W&A internal network with the caption, "We didn't ask who she was. Now we know." The post was reshared nearly 400 times in just 45 minutes. Senior staff from other branches began commenting. One wrote, "I remember her name. She's the one who first introduced the old-fashioned butter cake to our original menu." Another, "She created the rule that every employee must eat the same dishes as our guests at least once a month to understand them better." A former manager added, "I was trained by Janelle, but after the 2012 restructuring, her name disappeared from all materials." The hashtag number JANELLEWASFIRST began trending internally. Connor sat in front of the screen, reading the comments, his face pale. Kristen was silent, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails left marks in her palms. "If people find out who she is, we'll lose all credibility." Connor looked at her, his voice firm. "We already did. We just haven't admitted it yet." Across the street, Janelle stood in a coffee shop watching Leah's post go live. She didn't smile. She simply opened her phone and sent an email to an old contact. She remembered. That's all I needed. Back at the restaurant, a middle-aged woman, clearly a longtime regular, walked in holding an old cookbook. She opened it and showed Marcus the inside cover. There, written in ink, was, "To the future kitchens we've yet to build, JRB." Marcus stared. "Where did you get this?" The woman smiled. "I was one of her first students, back in her cooking classes for single mothers. 2001. She didn't just teach cooking, she taught people to believe they deserved good service, and to serve others with kindness too." Kristen stood motionless, her eyes blank. Connor turned and said, "We should have asked her name from the beginning." Leah returned with the photo and pinned it back on the staff board. Beneath the Employee of the Month section she had once scratched out, she wrote a new line, "Honorary founder, recognized at last." And in that moment, as if a circle had finally closed, everyone in the restaurant stood still for several seconds. No cheers, no orders, no emergency meeting. Just a quiet acknowledgement, rippling from one heart to another. And as a warning to those who run the system from afar, you may erase someone's name from the documents, but you cannot erase them from the memories of those they once touched with kindness. At 10 a.m. the next morning, the headquarters of W&A Hospitality in Chicago was thick with tension, more akin to a congressional hearing than a corporate meeting. On the 28th floor, in a conference room usually reserved for investor relations, executives were now gathered for a very different reason: managing an internal crisis. On the large screen at the front of the room appeared the black and white photo Leah had posted. Janelle Baines standing in a modest kitchen in 1999, smiling resolutely with a simple caption, "Co-founder." In the room sat the current CEO, the head of legal, the HR director, and several longtime staff members, those rumored to know more than they had ever said aloud. A heavy silence lingered until an IT staffer entered and placed a USB on the table. "We recovered a cache backup from the company's legacy intranet, archived in 2010. It contains a section on brand history, and her name is still there." The general counsel glanced at the CEO. "We have a problem." At the flagship location, the source of everything, Leah, Marcus, and several staff members had pinned a large printout of Janelle's photo above the oven in the kitchen. Below it, they added handwritten notes. "She was the first to show us the way. The recipe began with her hands. The founder they never mentioned. No one had instructed this. It was simply the natural course of overdue justice." Diners began asking, "Who is she?" And for the first time, the answers didn't come from PR or marketing. They came from the cooks, the table bussers, the dishwashers. "She's the one who laid the foundation for everything we do here." A black mother carrying her child stood before the photo for a long moment before quietly tearing up. "My niece used to take her free cooking classes on the South Side. Nobody ever talked about it until today." At the same time, a leaked email from former executive Gregory Bellamy surfaced online. In the internal message from 2014, he had written, "We should consider phasing out references to Janelle B in brand materials to avoid identity confusion with the new founder narrative. This will be handled through gradual content revisions, not public, strictly internal, must be discreet but thorough." The email included an attachment, a list of documents containing her name marked for update. The employee community exploded. Some called it the erasure order. The hashtag number sign Janelle was erased spread across the internal network and then to Twitter. Not long after, a middle-aged man walked into the flagship branch carrying a small wooden box. His name was Curtis Daniels, former head chef of the original location in 1999. "I didn't speak up because I thought I was the only one who remembered her." He placed the box on the prep counter. Inside was Janelle's first handwritten recipe notebook. Aged pages, uneven handwriting, but every line filled with soul. Marcus opened it and turned to the first page. "Every dish here must reflect something real about the cook, the eater, and the person who was never invited to the table." Curtis pointed to the sentence. "That's Janelle. She didn't care where her name was printed. She cared who had a seat." Leah photographed each page and posted them with the caption, "The real menu we forgot." Kristen received an email from the board of directors with the subject line, "Immediate action required, historical records review." She tried to push back. "We can't let a wave of emotional response derail our entire brand strategy." But a board member responded curtly, "Emotion is what brings customers back. Truth is what keeps us standing." Connor, seated across from her, said nothing. When the meeting ended, he walked straight to the HR office and submitted his resignation. "I can't work at a place where values are erased for being inconvenient." On internal forums, employees from 14 other branches began posting photos of Janelle on their kitchen walls. Some even recreated her original test kitchen in their break rooms. A supervisor at the Dallas location wrote, "We renamed our spice shelf the Janelle Rack. Each employee picks one spice that feels like them, just like she used to do." At HQ, the IT department received a request to temporarily lock editing rights to the About Us page due to the overwhelming volume of employee-initiated updates. People were re-adding her name wherever they could, despite the system's automated attempts to remove it. Media outlets took notice. A journalist from the Chicago Tribune published an article titled, "The Founder Who Cooked in Silence." The piece compiled testimonies from former staff, leaked emails, archival photos, and detailed the eerie timeline between Janelle's quiet exit and the corporate restructuring that conveniently erased her. The article closed with one sentence: "History doesn't disappear, it just gets covered by a new menu." The piece spread quickly, shared by top chefs, activists, and even competitors, some of whom had known Janelle from her community kitchen days. Janelle made no public statement. She declined interviews, but she did send a handwritten letter to the team at the flagship location. In it, she wrote, "I don't need my name back on the founder's wall. I need the values it once stood for to be brought back." Marcus read the letter aloud to the entire staff. Leah whispered, "She doesn't need to speak anymore. We are her voice now." The air in the kitchen grew still, but not heavy. It was the kind of stillness that comes just before a fire rises in the oven. Everyone felt it. Something was changing, not just in this one branch, but across the entire company that had been built on values and then forgotten the person who first defined them. On social media, customers began pushing for a new campaign, "Bring her name back." Graphic designers created new logos, merging the W&A icon with the handwritten name Janelle. A group of fans released a short documentary built from old photos and community clips. And on Friday night, when the flagship reopened, a temporary LED board stood outside the front entrance. It didn't say W&A, it simply read, "Tonight we cook for the one who cooked first." 3 days after Janelle's photo went viral across social media and aired on national news networks, the headquarters of W&A Hospitality finally broke its silence. An unscheduled press conference was held in Chicago, announcing the company's formal recognition of Ms. Janelle Baines's contributions during the founding years. The current CEO, who had never mentioned Janelle in any previous speeches, read from a prepared statement, his face tense and expressionless. We apologize for the shortcomings in acknowledging and preserving our brand's historical record. We are working with an advisory panel to reintegrate Ms. Baines's name into internal documentation and the official website. But those watching, customers, staff, and former chefs, sensed something was off. There was no mention of erasure, no specific details on who made the decision. No one took responsibility. And most of all, Janelle herself was absent. Internally, the backlash was even harsher. A group-wide email from the legal department instructed all employees to refrain from making public comments on the brand situation to maintain message consistency. The email ended with, "Let the communications department handle the narrative." That line drove Marcus, who had just reposted Janelle's photo on the main fridge door, into a fury. He took a screenshot of the email and posted it on the internal network with the caption, "This story didn't start with communications. It started in the kitchen." Over 300 employees liked the post. One replied, "And it will end in the kitchen too." Kristen, the one behind the removal of Janelle's name from the brand system, was summoned to a private meeting with the board of directors. She attempted to defend herself. "I was simply following the unified branding directive. Not mentioning Janelle was part of our strategy to focus on the future, not the past." But one board member rebutted, "The past doesn't disappear just because you want it to." Kristen wasn't fired, but from that day on, media responsibilities were reassigned to a new team. Individuals with less power, but with a deeper understanding of what the name Janelle Baines truly meant. A group of employees launched a campaign called Number Name Her Now. They printed new staff t-shirts with the phrase, "She's always been here." They handwrote Janelle's name on temporary menus. At the flagship location, customers were handed flyers detailing Janelle's history, along with a QR code linking to a video interview with former chefs who had worked alongside her. The video wasn't company-funded. It was filmed on a phone and edited on an old laptop in the break room. Yet within 48 hours, it garnered over 3 million views on TikTok. The media began to press harder. If Janelle was truly a co-founder, why did it take more than a decade to acknowledge her? And if today's recognition was genuine, why was there no specific apology, no restitution, no official honoring ceremony? A journalist from NPR interviewed Curtis Daniels, the former head chef. He answered bluntly, "You can't undo a decade of erasure with a 15-minute speech and no eye contact." In her piece, the journalist concluded, "The name Janelle Baines is not a title. It is a truth that was edited out of the frame." Janelle, as usual, did not respond to media requests. But for the first time since the story broke, she agreed to meet Leah, Marcus, and a small group of core employees at a quiet cafe on the city's west side. She arrived on time, wearing a white shirt, coarse fabric pants, and carrying a bundle of old documents. "I don't need to be recognized," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I just want to know, are you being honest with the food you're making?" Leah nodded, placing her hand on the table. "We want to rebuild the original menu, from scratch, with your name on it." Janelle didn't respond, but she opened the folder and pulled out the first handwritten draft of the 1999 menu. "I don't hold the copyright, I hold the memory." Meanwhile, a major shareholder sent a letter to the board of directors requesting an independent investigation into the company's communications decisions regarding Janelle. If executive leadership intentionally altered historical records for commercial purposes, this is not just an ethical breach, it's a breach of fiduciary duty. Market pressure mounted. Stock prices dipped slightly, but the greater damage was reputational. Competing restaurant groups launched ad campaigns with slogans like, "We name our founders, always." A small restaurant chain even renamed a dish Baines Brisket as a public tribute. At headquarters, a group of mid-level employees from the product development team hung a framed photo of Janelle in the menu development meeting space. Their department head reprimanded them and asked for it to be taken down. They refused. Without her, today's menu wouldn't exist. Her absence in this room is what's abnormal. Her presence is justice. The statement spread internally like a rallying cry. Absence is abnormal. Presence is justice. To contain the fallout, the company announced a new event titled Founders Legacy Day, intended to honor all those who contributed to laying the foundation of the brand. But the invitation sent to Janelle did not specify her role in the ceremony. It simply read, "Special guest." Marcus was furious. They still can't say the three words. Co-founder. Leah said nothing. But later she printed the invitation and scribbled in red ink. "You should have asked her first." She taped it to the kitchen door. Internally, concerns began to surface about over-personalization. A supervisor at the Arizona branch emailed, "We shouldn't turn one individual into an overblown symbol. It risks creating division." But responses from other branches were clear. "She's not a symbol. She's history." A branch in New Jersey even temporarily renamed itself Janelle's Table, defying corporate orders not to alter branding. Customers flocked in droves. The head chef told the press, "I'm willing to be fined for this, but I won't keep pretending." By the weekend, at the flagship store, the team decided to host a special evening called Dinner for the First One. They reprinted the original 1999 menu and invited former employees to return and serve the dishes. The food wasn't fancy, no haute cuisine, but each dish came with a note. Based on the original by J.B. The dinner wasn't live-streamed. No journalists were invited. Just a single small camera was placed in the corner. Leah stood at the back of the room, watching guests eat in silence, some of them teary-eyed. "If she saw this," Leah whispered, "she'd know. Her name wasn't forgotten. It was just making its way back to where it belonged." As night fell over the city, the air inside Janelle's home was filled with the scent of sautéed onions, brown butter, and something older, like memory simmered slowly in broth. Her kitchen wasn't large, but every corner of it said that it belonged to someone who had made a life from cooking, not just cooked to survive. The warm yellow light from the low-hanging bulb reflected off cast-iron pots aged by time, wooden spoons worn smooth by use, and a heavy notebook of memories left open on the table. She sat in silence, eyes fixed on the scribbled line. "Cabbage and bone broth, for the night I lost my name." Next to it was the letter that had arrived earlier that afternoon. No envelope, no header, just a few typed paragraphs in the carefully polished language of some PR department trying to reconnect with a part of the truth they once buried. In it, they proposed organizing an event honoring the founding history, inviting Janelle to return as an inspiration for future generations. They didn't apologize. They mentioned her name as if she had never been erased. No acknowledgement, not a single sentence that spoke the truth. Just an invitation to stand beneath the stage lights orchestrated by the very people who had deleted her name from the plaque, from internal documents, from the company's website. She wasn't angry. Anger was something she had felt long ago, in those early years after being pushed out of the very kitchen she had built. But she had learned how to let anger sleep. Instead, she wrote, she cooked. She continued to create recipes no one knew about, not because she had something to prove, but because she didn't know how to do anything else but love food in her own way. Sometimes she wondered, what hurts more, being forgotten or being remembered the wrong way? Now she knew. The worst pain is when they start remembering you as nothing more than a symbol for their rebranded campaigns. Not as a real person, not the one who once cried over a soup that came out too salty, not the one who used her personal savings to buy the first dishwasher for the original branch, not the one who slept on a torn leather chair after closing shifts because the vegetable delivery was late. They didn't remember any of that, and now they wanted her to stand with them, not to make things right, but to attach her name to a door they once slammed shut. Across town, Marcus was sitting in the backyard of the flagship location, holding an unsigned resignation letter. Leah walked out with 2 cups of cold coffee. They sat side by side, saying nothing. After a few minutes, Marcus finally spoke. "They emailed me, asked if I'd consider staying on as Director of Internal Culture." Leah didn't turn. "They invited me to join the Heritage Menu Council." Marcus gave a half laugh. "Sounds like titles created to stop people from asking questions." Leah nodded. "Without Janelle, there's no heritage to speak of." They fell quiet again. Marcus set his cup down on the wooden bench. "I used to think that if I stayed quiet long enough, everything would blow over. But turns out, what passed wasn't the moment. It was me." The silence stayed. That evening, with no guests and no cameras, the staff gathered in the kitchen and decided to do something they'd never done before. Cook a dish that had never appeared on the official menu. It was called braised cabbage and bone broth for the night she lost her voice. They couldn't find a precise recipe, only a few handwritten lines in Janelle's forgotten notebook. But Leah said, "The flavor isn't in the ingredients. It's in the silence of those who kept cooking when no one believed in their name anymore." The team prepared everything by hand. No machines, no delivery orders. Every ingredient came from the local market and nearby farms, just like Janelle had always done. When the dish was done, they didn't alert the media. They invited only one person, Mr. Harris, the retired security guard from the very first location. He sat down and ate spoonfuls like someone hearing an old song for the first time in decades. No one said a word until he placed his spoon down and started to cry. The night she left, I was the only one who stayed behind to clean the kitchen. I ate this out of a paper bowl, sitting on a bag of rice. Nobody knew. Nobody asked. The next day, Kristen, the board member, was informed that the dish had been cooked again, but she also received something else, a short handwritten letter from Janelle, written in smudged blue ink. It contained just one sentence. Let the food speak. No threat, no demand, no plea for recognition, just a reminder that food doesn't lie, and whatever people cook will always tell the truth about who created it. Kristen sat alone in the 43rd floor boardroom, holding the letter like it was a mirror. She remembered the first time she had met Janelle, not in a board meeting, but at a tasting session. Janelle had been both head chef and creative director back then. She hadn't said much. Just let Kristen try a dish of roasted sweet potatoes and whispered, "This is something I learned from my mother, but with a bit of apple cider vinegar to reflect the modern world." Kristen had praised the dish in a magazine feature, but she had never once mentioned who made it. And now, reading the letter, she saw it more clearly than ever. The biggest mistake wasn't erasing someone's name, it was trying to replace them with a convenient image. It wasn't a grand dinner. There were no stage lights, no cameras, no viral hashtags, no press, no gold-foiled menus. It was just a long wooden table, hastily set up in the second-floor staff break room, a place once used for small group meetings, rushed lunches, or the occasional moment when someone cried alone after a grueling shift. That table had now been scrubbed clean, not with industrial wipes, but with the sleeves of those whose sweat had once soaked into it. On the table, there were no candles, no flowers, just chipped ceramic plates, mismatched spoons, and one large tray of cabbage and bone broth soup with ginger, charred onions, and a few slices of dried apple, a dish that had never once appeared on any official menu. Leah was the first to dip the ladle into the pot and begin serving. No one rushed. No one asked what the dish was called, because they all knew. They sat there. Marcus, Leah, Norma, the senior prep cook, Josiah, the new intern whose last name nobody yet knew, and at the head of the table sat Janelle, the one who needed no introduction, no microphone, no nod to let everyone know she was the reason they were here. They began to eat. No one spoke. Just the occasional soft clink of spoons against bowls. The kind of sighs that aren't from fatigue, but something else loosening gently in the throat. Quiet, but certain. The air was thick with warm ginger, slow-simmered marrow, and a kind of memory that no one could quite name. Kristen arrived late. She wasn't wearing a blazer, just a dark wool cardigan, her hair tied simply at the back. She didn't enter like a board member, but like someone who had spent the night grappling with a question no one had forced her to ask, but one she could no longer live with unanswered. She hadn't been invited, yet she came. No one welcomed her. But no one turned her away either. She took the last empty seat at the far end of the table. In front of her sat an untouched bowl of soup. She picked up a spoon, took a small sip, and in that moment, the entire 15-year story vanished. No emails, no memos, no brand names, legal teams, or PR consultants. Just the taste and the truth. Because truth shows up clearest when no one's trying to narrate it. Janelle was the first to speak. She didn't ask questions. She didn't assign blame. She just told a story. The day I created the first recipe, it wasn't because I wanted to start a restaurant. It was because I needed to make a meal someone could finish without crying too hard after losing their mother. The table went still. She went on. Then someone asked me, "Can this recipe be scaled?" I said I wasn't sure, because it wasn't in the ingredients. It was in the hands of the person cooking it, the one who knew what it felt like to miss someone they couldn't speak about. Leah nodded gently, eyes glistening. Marcus set his spoon down, looking directly at Kristen. We tried to protect the recipe, but what was lost wasn't just the dish. It was the reason it existed. Kristen took a deep breath. She knew this was a moment that couldn't be lied through. I used to think that if we kept the company alive, its history would survive with it. But I was wrong. We only preserved the shell. The heart of it was lost when we erased the one who created it. She turned toward Janelle. I can't undo the past, but I can sit here, not as someone asking for forgiveness, but as someone ready to hear what I should have heard a long time ago. Janelle didn't respond right away. She looked down into her bowl. There are some things that don't need to be heard again. They just need to stop being repeated. Then she stood and ladled more soup for the person next to her. No one clapped, but everyone understood. Something had been mended, not by signatures, not by contracts, but by the simple act of sitting at the same table. That table would never be listed in the company's official history, but for those present, it became a chapter that could never be erased. Later that evening, an internal memo was circulated, not from upper management, but from the junior staff. It proposed a new initiative called Table Sessions, where once a month a small group of employees would gather to share personal dishes and the stories behind them. No cameras, no reports, no corporate formatting, just food and truth. Kristen approved the proposal without changing a single word. At the bottom, she handwrote one line: start with hers. 3 months after the meal at the second-floor table, every branch of the Harvest and Hearth restaurant chain received a new memo from headquarters. It wasn't about price increases. It wasn't a fall promotion. It was something entirely different. Starting this month, each location will launch the first version of the Quiet Menu, a menu with no prices, no descriptions, just 3 dishes and 1 message. Choose what you need, not what you want. At the bottom was the signature of current CEO Kristen Ward, and beside it, a handwritten line in black ink, inspired by Janelle Ray. Some regional managers were surprised. A few quietly resisted, but many smiled, as if a burden they hadn't known they were carrying had finally been lifted. Those who had worked with Janelle understood. This wasn't a marketing move. It was a redefinition, and there was no going back. At the Westwood branch, the place where the first incident had sparked all the changes, the kitchen had been reorganized. The table where Janelle had once stood that night had been repainted, not replaced, preserving the old scratches. Etched onto its surface, by hand, were the words, "To remember, you must taste." Leah was now the head chef, though her business card read only, Leah W., Cook and Listener. She didn't want a title. She didn't want a seat at the executive table. She just wanted to stand in the kitchen, where she could hear the sizzle of pans, the rhythm of knives, and the silences she had learned to honor from the woman in white that day. In a rare interview with an F&B industry publication, Kristen said something that kept getting quoted over and over again. I used to think we were building an empire, but it turns out what needed to be built wasn't an empire. It was a standard. And standards don't come from control. They come from listening. She no longer appeared in public often. No more keynote speeches. No more ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But one decision of hers led every restaurant in the system to keep one empty chair in the dining area. No one was allowed to sit in it, place items on it, or clear it away. The chair always faced the kitchen, like a witness, like a reminder. Janelle, after that gathering, left the city. No one knew where she went. Only one parcel arrived at headquarters with no return address, containing a worn tin box and a handwritten note, "For the next who listens." Inside the box were old, faded, handwritten recipe cards, organized with care like a book with no cover. Kristen did not allow digital storage. She instructed only one printed copy be made, locked in a safe at the Westwood office, accessible only to those who had once sat at the second-floor table. Marcus was promoted, not because of media pressure, but because he was the only executive willing to eat a meal without a list of ingredients. He was now Director of Internal Culture, a title that had never existed, never came with a big salary, but carried more influence than any previous role. During every onboarding session for new hires, he would tell the story of the woman in white no one recognized, not to inspire but to warn. Never assume you know someone by what they wear, and never assume that because you have a title, you understand everything. A year later, at a hospitality industry conference in Denver, a young speaker stepped onto the stage. She wore a white shirt, no makeup, no visual effects. She simply stood there and said, "Standards are not written in manuals. Standards are how you treat someone who has no power to respond." The room fell silent. Then a wave of applause filled the space. Not deafening, but steady, like blood flow returning to a limb after years of being cut off. Harvest and Hearth did not become the biggest brand, but it became the first in America to adopt the voice-free suggestion policy, allowing employees to anonymously submit menu ideas they believe should be served, along with the personal story behind them. Some dishes were approved, others were rejected, but every single one was read, and that was what mattered most. It's been said that at the Oakland branch, once, a guest eating a bowl of ginger cabbage soup suddenly burst into tears without knowing why. She didn't call for service. She simply placed her hand on the empty chair across from her and quietly said, "Thank you for still making space for the ones we've forgotten." You might not remember the name of the dish served that day, but you'll remember the chair for those who were once forgotten, once misjudged, once silenced, and maybe you've sat in that chair at some point in your own life. This story isn't about a restaurant. It's not about a CEO. It's about how you treat someone you believe doesn't matter. Because sometimes they're the very ones who end up rewriting everything we thought we knew about dignity and kindness. If this story made you feel more hopeful, more loving, or even angry that injustice still exists, don't let that feeling disappear into silence. Leave a comment below. What is the empty chair in your life? And if you want to keep walking alongside stories like this, quiet stories that shake entire systems, hit that subscribe button. Because here, every video isn't just a story, it's a reminder. Respect shouldn't be a privilege. It should be the standard. Hidden boss stories. Justice, kindness wins, respect matters. Undercover, CO.